Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores our human condition through a behavioral science lens. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We talk with researchers and other interesting people to unlock the mysteries of our world in order to help you find your groove.
But before we get to our guest, Tim, we wanted to highlight one of our listeners' shout out to us. This is from Uptown Roz on Apple Podcast. And I quote, "Thoughtful and enlightening! Exclamation point. I've now listened to a dozen episodes and every one of them has been thoughtful and enlightening. Also, completely relatable to everyday life, like discovering a binge-worthy TV show, only better. Glad to see I have hundreds of episodes left to stream. Look forward to the journey of behavioral science discovery with Kurt and Tim, exclamation point," and signed off by Uptown Roz.
That is very, very nice. And I have to say that, anybody who writes a really, really great review can get it read and memorialized for the rest of eternity in the introduction of a podcast if you just go out and write one.
Are you incentivizing our listeners, Tim?
It's a little reward. Okay. Short story, just thank you to Uptown Roz. That was very nice.
Yeah, thank you to Uptown Roz. Very kind review. And now, as they say, on with the show.
Okay, P.T. Barnum. Our guest in this episode is David Creswell. David is a professor of psychology at Carnegie Mellon University and has published numerous studies on mindfulness-based interventions and their impact on well-being. He is a prominent researcher specializing in health psychology, mindfulness meditation, and stress management.
He's also the author of a paper published in January 2023 in Psychological and Cognitive Science edition of PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, called "Nightly Sleep Duration Predicts Grade Point Average in the First Year of College." And sleep is such an important issue, it got our attention.
Yeah, absolutely. This article is different from others on sleep, and there's quite a bit of literature on this. But David tracked both the grades, and his colleagues tracked both the grades and the amount of sleep for each of the study participants, by the way, who wore Fitbits during the study. Now, the data was very, very rich and provided an insight into the impact sleep can have on our daily lives, and most especially on our performance.
And it was a great conversation and one we think that's important. Not just the idea that college students need to get more sleep. Duh. We all know that. But the implications, if we zoom out from this for all of us on the impact that sleep has on our long-term performance. It's pretty cool.
It's very cool. And as you might imagine, our conversation really focuses on a pretty detailed view of the study and its implications.
Yeah. And the short story is this: getting 7 or more hours of sleep can have a very positive benefit to your daily life. And in our grooving session, we'll talk about some tips and tricks to help you find your way to get that great night's sleep.
And with that, groovers, we invite you to sit back or maybe even lie down in a comfortable place and close your eyes and maybe even gently fall into slumber.
No, Tim,
what?
We don't want people to fall into slumber when we're listening to the podcast. I know we're boring, but we're not that boring.
Well, this entire episode's about sleep. But why wouldn't we invite people to sleep?
But not sleeping through the episode. They can sleep after the episode is done. Right. You need to start that over.
All right, rewind. And with that, groovers, we invite you to sit up in a straight and possibly uncomfortable chair and pay attention with a highly caffeinated drink of choice. Is this working better for you?
Much better. Much better.
As we have our conversation with David Creswell. Welcome, David Creswell, to Behavioral Grooves.
Thanks for having me.
It's really great to have you here. We need to know instantly, with a quick speed round response, coffee or tea?
Tea.
Oh, I like it.
Love that.
Okay.
Love that.
Barbie or Oppenheimer?
I have a 6 and a 4-year-old, so it's Barbie all the
way. You kind of have to that way. Did you dress up? Did you do the whole pink thing when you went? Is it?
No, absolutely not. I told you I have a 6 and 4-year-old. There's no time for, we're in survival mode a lot of the time.
Okay, true or false? Freshmen at college shouldn't really worry about how much sleep they get at night because they're young and they can really rebound quickly, right?
That's a evidence-based false.
I'm sure we will. That'll actually be, we'll get into that with our first question. And then I think the last speed round question that we have is sleep or mindfulness, which is more important to having a good life in your mind?
That's an easy one.
Sleep. Oh,
sleep.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, we're going to have to dig into that as we go. And sorry, that wasn't like a speed round question. That's more of a big philosophical question. But, so let's start, because we wanted to talk to you about a recent paper that you just published a few months ago in PNAS about the relationship between sleep deprivation of new college students and the impact that has on their cumulative GPA. So first, tell us a little bit about the study and the hypothesis behind that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We worked on this across a number of institutions. So this was really a multi-university effort that we led here at Carnegie Mellon University. And we also had University of Washington and Notre Dame as other participating schools. And in each of the schools, we had put Fitbits on students, undergraduates. These were primarily first-year students that we reported on in this initial paper. And we tracked their sleep and activity patterns over the course of an academic term, a semester, or even several quarters. And we got all sorts of information on these students. Really, our interest was in trying to understand risk and resilience factors for undergraduates, particularly as they make this college transition. We know that first year of college is an important time where, for many students, they're sort of on their own for the first time, establishing their own routines, including their sleep routines. But also, they're getting the first college grades, and we know that those first year grades and GPA are a really important predictor for sort of lifetime, work and life success. So it's a really important, I think, transition period in the lives of many students, particularly students going on to, residential universities.
Yeah. So what was the hypothesis? What was your expectation going into this?
Well, our initial expectation was that the amount of nightly sleep that these students were carrying, particularly early in the term, would actually carry some important information for the patterns they were setting up for their academic success. And I think if you asked most students, first-year students, what's the best strategy for their academic success, they would say sleep less and study more. And what we actually had was a very different hypothesis, and that's that the more sleep that students are getting, the more opportunity for setting that sleep-induced kind of learning and memory consolidation, that sort of offline learning that we know happens during sleep, that if you could give people longer sleep periods, particularly at night, that's going to actually be really important for improving their academic success. And so we measured their GPAs. We got that from the institutions. We actually got the informed consent of all these participants saying, hey, we're going to track, your academic performance. And so for folks who agreed to participate, we were able to get that information. And we could look at whether their nightly sleep patterns were important for predicting end of semester GPA. So I should say, one of the things we wanted to do is say, could we look early in the academic term? So even that first couple of weeks, that's sort of an important time where people are setting up their sleep patterning that is going to sort of then, ideally drive forward sort of healthy sleep patterns over the course of the semester. But also looking at those first couple weeks of the academic term are important, because if we can see that there's sort of sleep problems or sleep protection in that period, it gives us an opportunity in future studies to be intervening in this period. Like, we want to be able to help students and not wait until it's too late at the end of the academic term. And so we really looked at the first sort of 4 to 6 weeks of the academic terms in these students. But what we found when we looked at this data, first of all, was that students were sleeping less than we thought they might be. They were sleeping on average about 6.5 hours a night.
Oh.
And that's probably not surprising to most first-year students. But the kind of standard sleep medicine guidelines usually push up to 7 to 10 hours of nightly sleep a night for this particular age group. And so they're undershooting. And, even if you say, hey, they're missing by about 30 minutes a night, that adds up over time. And you generate these pretty significant sleep debts. So that was one finding. The next finding that we found was that, maybe this is an aside, but that the time zones that these first year students are living on is certainly not my time zone. They're actually going to bed about 2:30 at night, waking up around 2:30 in the morning, sorry, and then waking up around 9 or so in the morning. And so I found that to be kind of interesting in terms of thinking about how are these first year students living? Well, they're really staying up until all hours. And by the way, that's during the week. If you look at their weekend patterning, their average bedtime is around 3 a.m. So they push it about a half an hour later and sleep in a little bit longer.
Wow.
So that's the first piece. I think the second piece was that we found that the amount of total nightly sleep predicted their end of semester GPA really in a linear fashion, such that the more average nightly sleep these students were getting, as measured by their Fitbits, was predictive of higher GPA, end of semester GPA. And the interesting thing was we saw that across these institutions, we saw it in 4 out of the 5 data sets. The fifth data set we saw, it wasn't statistically significant, but sort of the pattern looked the same. So it was sort of generally true across these different institutions that we looked at, and a fairly robust effect. And what we did was we then said, well, do these effects, can we still see these total nightly sleep effects on end of semester GPA, even if we control for their previous semester GPA? So even if we're sort of saying, hey, we're going to take your kind of existing academic performance and sort of look at this more prospectively, and yes, we see these effects persist. We then said, well, what if we control for their total academic load? Like maybe it's just, students that are taking a heavier load or also sleeping less. And when we controlled for that, we still see the effects. And then we said, well, what if we look at daytime sleep, right? Like some of these students are not sleeping much at night, but then they're doing a big nap bender, in the afternoons. And so we aggregated up, like, what's the total daytime sleep outside of that nightly sleep window, right?
Yeah. Wow. David, it's interesting because one of the things that was surprising to me from the study was that piece that you just mentioned at the end. It's that daytime naps don't necessarily help. It's not the cumulative amount of sleep that I get during a day. It's the amount I get in this nighttime setting that I have. Any thought on why that is part of this? Is there any hypothesis behind that, or is that TBD as you guys are looking at this in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have strong data to sort of unpack that. I think if I had to step back and look at this, if you look at the sleep medicine guidelines and the way people really are trying to support healthy sleep patterns, it's about really protecting and normalizing a nightly sleep window, or at least a long sleep window for people every day. And because let's face it, some people are night workers, and so they have to shift their sleep window. But to the degree you can really normalize that sleep window, sort of protect that time, that's going to be critical for outcomes. I think there's all sorts of interesting biology around if you start building in naps and how that's sort of using up some of the, the sleep juice, so to speak, that people have for helping them fall asleep. And I don't want to, for all the listeners here who are saying, hey, I'm a huge sleep nap, I'm a nap person, and I think there's certainly individual differences, and some people do quite well with naps. So I don't want to take away the effectiveness of naps for some people. But, if you look in aggregate at these first year college students, we're seeing this really small sleep window.
Yeah.
And I think there's an opportunity with this research to start to have a new conversation around what the best strategies are for people's academic success. And I think this long held idea, I'm going to stay up later and study longer, because that's going to be the key for me, acing exams and so forth, is probably not the right strategy, at least according to this data.
So the all-nighters that I did at the Perkins with the free coffee all night long were not the best strategy for long-term success on that, probably, right?
Yeah, it's it depends on how many all-nighters you were pulling.
Okay. I think too many. I will tell you that. Too many.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think the big risk that I think people have is that as you start to chain together multiple nights where you're really impairing your total sleep duration, you're getting into big trouble, and you're building up this sleep debt in ways that's hard to recover from. And so, I don't think this research is saying, hey, like, if you need to pull an all-nighter or something terrible happens and you need to be in the ER with a close friend,
Yeah,
these
it's
are
going to happen.
these things on balance, I think, are okay. But as you start to look at, what are my sleep patterns, and what am I protecting as a normal sort of nightly sleep window? I think that's where the conversation should really focus. And I think those are the places where, our data is really suggesting that first year students are missing the mark. And, there's lots of reasons. They could be studying, they could be socializing, they could be playing video games and so on. And so, there's probably a lot of reasons for that.
Tell us about the last bucket of
Here's the last
findings.
bucket. So we took this same nightly sleep duration data and we looked at it in a different way. We said, well, what if we bucket people, to use the bucket analogy, what if we bucket people into sleepers who are typically 6 hours a night or less, or 6 to 7 hour sleepers, or 7 hour plus sleepers, right?
Okay.
So now we have these three groups. We can look at them and we can say, what happened from their previous semester GPA to their semester GPA where we were looking at in this study, right? And what we find is, and so it's sort of thinking about what's the GPA change that's happening for these three groups. And what we find is that the sleepers who are getting less than 6 hours a night, so our kind of poor sleepers, we actually saw declines in their GPA from their previous term GPA to the kind of target GPA we're interesting.
Wow.
If we look at the sort of 6 to 7 hour a night sleepers, they actually have a slight improvement, close to zero, but a little boost in terms of their GPA change. And then if we look at the 7 plus, these are the folks that are getting a much bigger boost in their GPA. And so this type of, we call this like a sensitivity analysis, a thresholded sensitivity analysis. But what it gives us is this sort of interesting information to sort of say, we think that getting less than 6 hours of sleep may be a particularly kind of important threshold where sleep is going from helpful to harmful as you start to drop below that 6 hour mark, at least on an average basis. And so I think that's an important signal to the world that, as you're starting to measure your nightly sleep over the course of your weeks, if you're dipping below that 6 hour mark per night, you're probably going to be in trouble.
Yeah. So it just makes me think about the generalizability of something like this, or maybe specifically the contribution to our larger sense of well-being. Have you given those that kind of lens any consideration?
Yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge that this was correlational work that we've been doing, really looking at these associations over time in a longitudinal study. And I think one of the big questions that I have is, is there actually a causal relationship between total nightly sleep and end of semester GPA? And one of the best ways that we've been starting to think about doing this work is to really offer sleep interventions early in academic terms to see if we can then actually increase people's GPAs towards the end of the term. And that was the whole reason we set up this work. We're now starting to think about ways we can do those trials. If these findings are true, and I think the trial work that we're going to do is going to help establish or at least test those relationships. But if they're true, I do think that there's cascading benefits to the sleep duration, getting your needed nightly sleep on people's, not only their academic success, but on their mental health and their capacity to build relationships and do some of the things that I think are so essential to being a first-year college student. We've seen this in other studies where nightly sleep duration seems to have some association with some of these variables. And we certainly know, at least on the neuroscience side, that there's nothing that should be surprising about the sort of nightly sleep duration academic success outcomes, because we know that sleep is such a critical period for learning and memory consolidation. And we've seen that in humans, we've seen that in rodent models now. And, people have continued to start to, are continuing to really build out this sort of brain basis for these effects.
Yeah. And again, obviously more research needs to be done on different cohorts and different things, but you could really make a pretty easy jump to saying, all right, well, if it has that impact on GPA, if you're in a work situation, long-term work success and a variety of other factors that you can kind of probably at least say, hey, there's some really good research that might kind of indicate that would be a piece, and maybe we should do some research on that. I want to go back. Before we got on air, we started talking about actually how you developed the study. And that was an interesting way. It's kind of a unique way that is probably becoming more and more common, but hasn't necessarily been in the past. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of how you guys developed the study?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, this was a multi-university effort, and that really gave us or opened up some ways to really evaluate the reliability or reproducibility of this work. And so, we had 5 trial data sets where we had students wearing Fitbits over an academic term or academic terms. And so what we did was we took one of the data sets and we called it our discovery data set. And we really started to look at all of the different types of sleep features. So you could imagine not just total nightly sleep duration being a feature that would be of interest, but we could say, what's the average bedtime, right?
Yeah.
And you could make interesting predictions, like students whose bedtimes are all over the place, right? One night I'm going to bed at midnight, the next night I'm going to bed at 5 a.m. And you can imagine that type of kind of variability would be pretty disruptive for people's sleep patterns and their academic success, their average wake time, for example.
Yeah.
And we looked at sleep in a number of ways in this discovery data set, and we really found that some of the most robust effects were in this total nightly sleep duration feature. And so we pushed that and a couple of other sleep features forward into now testing these associations in our confirmatory data sets. So we pre-registered our predictions after we did that discovery work. We talked about the discovery work in our pre-registration, and we said, hey, we think total nightly sleep duration is a really important factor for people's academic success. And we're now going to test it in these data sets that we haven't yet looked at. And, as I said, we saw these pretty robust and significant associations in 4 out of the 5 data sets. And so, we think this may be a robust effect. We want more people to be looking at this. And I think we've sort of set up a method for doing this discovery and then confirmatory work across multiple data sets.
David, can you talk for those listeners who may not be in an academic or research setting as to why this is different than how a traditional, what makes this discovery component, and then going back and looking at from that discovery work into then the next part of research? Why is that different or important for people to understand?
Yeah, I think there's been an issue across the social and behavior and biological sciences around sort of snooping in your data and then sort of writing a paper that says, hey, we kind of thought this was going to be the case. And, this can produce what we would call false positives, where, it was really sort of by luck that you kind of fell upon these findings and it wasn't robust over time. But with this work that we do in terms of a 2-stage discovery confirmatory work, we're saying, listen, we're doing this discovery work. We looked at all this data, but now we're holding up what we think to be some evidence-based predictions and really testing them in new data sets in these confirmatory data sets. And so it, I think, raises the bar on this sort of issue around, hey, we need to do discovery work. We need to sort of kind of mine the data and look for what are the best sleep features in our case, but then hold those up to independent validation. And I think what it does for science is it allows us to both acknowledge the importance of the discovery work, but also acknowledge the importance of reproducibility and that we could report how reproducible these findings were. And that really moves science forward because we don't want to be publishing a lot of false positives that sort of lead people down certain directions that just aren't going to hold up over time.
Why is reproducibility an issue? Why is it important?
Well, we hold science and our scientific findings to be telling us something true about humans. And if we're just publishing flashy findings that aren't going to reproduce in other settings, it is going to lose the audience that we have and the trust in scientists in terms of reporting something that's going to be a reliable effect. And so, in the last 10 years, there's been just a really huge transformation, particularly in psychology and to some degree in the social sciences. We're kind of pushing the biological sciences to catch up in some cases, because I think these issues around reproducibility are true no matter what scientific discipline we're coming from. But I think we're really seeing a major phase shift towards these type of reports that focus on how reproducible is this finding, as opposed to how flashy or exciting would this finding be. And so we're doing a lot more around open science and pre-registration. So pre-registration is this approach that we take where we basically say, here's what we're going to do, and here's what we're predicting. And I'm going to put that in a public place so everybody knows it. I haven't collected the data yet, or I haven't analyzed the data. And no matter how it comes out, I'm going to have some report around what I actually found. I think this is an important advance for how we do our science. It's scary for many scientists who've had some researcher degrees of freedom around how they want to think about the work that they're doing, and
how they want to present it.
How they want to present it. It also is scary for a scientist to go out on a limb and make a counterintuitive or flashy prediction. But that's why I think we're trying to do this discovery work too. So sort of say, hey, we've done some initial work, or we've done some pilot work, for example, and we think these things are going to come out. And I think that's good for science.
Yeah.
So David, where else is this relevant? Where else is this being studied?
Yeah, there's this amazing research in neuroscience where they're looking at rodents. So these are mice or rats in studies, and really looking at sleep effects in really interesting ways. So a typical parent, and by the way, this is work that's been going on for 3 decades. So,
wow.
It's an established literature. And what they do is they take these rodents, they basically put them into a new maze. They then give them an opportunity to sleep. Sometimes those are naps, and so sometimes those are these are nocturnal animals. So they're sleeping during the day. They give them a period to sleep, and they basically put these wires into their brains to really look at electrical activity in specific areas of the brain during both the running period where they're running these mazes, during the sleep period, and then again when they put them back in that maze to see quickly or how quickly they've sort of learned, right? Do they know how to run that maze and sort of find the food stations in it? They find that these sleep periods are a really critical time where you're sort of replaying, in this case, that maze running experience. And so some of the terms for this literature are sleep replay in this literature. They find in really interesting ways that you're sort of replaying those in a forward or backward sequence in terms of the replay experience during sleep. And there's some suggestion that these replay events during sleep are sort of occurring at a 5-fold faster rate than what they were in real time. The hippocampus plays a critical role in this type of sleep replay effect. And it's also communicating with the prefrontal cortex in ways that we think may be really sort of replaying these events and sort of baking them into, in this case, these rodents' long-term memories in ways that when they then come and run the maze on the next day or after that nap, they're able to run it more effectively, efficiently, and faster. If you set up lesions to sort of disrupt this replay, you can wipe out these learning effects. So what I love about this animal literature, and this has been predominantly animals, a little bit in humans, is that it's really already, I think, been highlighting now for decades the importance of these sleep periods for learning and memory consolidation. And for those of us sort of, those of us humans that are going to college, we don't typically think about sleep as being an active period of learning. We think about it as a time to sort of maybe reset our metabolic systems and kind of, rest and relax. But we don't think about it as an active period. But in our brains, particularly during periods of our sleep, particularly slow wave sleep, there is a very active learning process that's going on that is so critical for helping us on the next day to be able to bring back those memories and that learning from the previous day. And I just think that work is so interesting and really starts to speak to what could potentially be some of the interesting neurobiological mechanisms for why total sleep duration may matter for driving forward these GPA benefits over the course of a semester.
if only I would have known about this research when I was 18 and, going, the less sleep I get, I can spend that extra couple hours studying and learning. And then, who cares? I can sleep when I'm dead. That was a quote that I used to always use. And I regret that now, but hey, that's how, live and learn, as we say. So
David, do you listen to music when you are falling off to sleep?
I do not. I try to keep a device away from me.
Okay.
A lot of the challenges with sleep have come with the advent of and the ubiquity of these data-enabled smartphones that we carry around. And we started to look at this data in our samples and finding that the number of notifications and phone light ups per hour is, on average, I think it was something like 60 to 80 light ups an hour.
What?
It's really, really high. And so you can imagine as a college student trying to fall asleep, but having this amazing little device next to you that's lighting up and pulling your attention. And so, a lot of the sort of sleep hygiene guidelines these days are really about putting phones out of arm's reach or ideally in the other room so that you can really protect winding down and falling asleep. And so I think there's some real value in sort of thinking about those things. You're probably going to ask me a different question. I hear I went on some tirade, but
No, that was fantastic. I'm curious about what's on your playlist though. What when you do listen to music, what do you like to listen to?
Yeah, well, my 6-year-old loves Taylor Swift, so on car rides I listen to a lot of Taylor Swift. So that's happening. But for me, I have a couple of Pandora stations that I like to cycle through, and most recently it's been my Hawaiian radio station, and I could tell you about my love for Hawaii at some point. But
let's just start with what kind of Hawaiian music. There's a wide variety. Are you like
I love the whole
folk
range
music,
of it.
like
I love
slack
the range.
key guitar,
love it.
and
yeah. And some of the kind of fun, even poppy Hawaiian music, if you call it poppy.
Don Ho and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay.
And then I'm a big classic rock guy, so I've been going back to my Beatles White Album, Pandora station, and kind of hitting some of the great stuff from that period.
I think those are two pretty great selections, actually.
Well, David, I have to tell you, as with a 13-year-old at home, the Taylor Swift is still prevalent. So you might be listening to Taylor for a long time in your car rides, just to let you know.
I'm bracing myself. It could be worse.
It could be worse. I will agree with you.
Right.
There's some goodness there. So
they're saying she's one of the best lyricists of our generation. So
that is true. That
super clever.
That is very true. So
yeah. David Creswell, thanks so much for being a guest on Behavioral Grooves, and we hope you'll come back to continue our conversation.
Yeah, that's great. And for folks who are interested in this work, please, check out our website, and I'll look forward to next time. We're going to, I think, talk about mindfulness training, and we're building some new mindfulness trainers. I'd love to tell folks about to test them out.
Fantastic. And we'll put all of those links in the show notes, so people, you can just check that out. And David, thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with David, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our very tired brains.
Oh, you are tired this morning, aren't you?
So we're talking about sleep, right? And we're doing this, and I literally got 3 hours of sleep last night. I have a sore throat, and it just kept me up all night. It was really, really bad. So yeah.
Sleep, and we're going to talk about this more, but just to make sure that listeners know, you have perpetual sleep troubles.
I can attest to the fact that my sleep is not like yours. You sleep like all through the night and perfectly. I am not that person. So I've gotten better. I have gotten a lot better at sleep over the years. I used to really have insomnia and be up in the middle of the night multiple hours and do different things. And it's gotten much better over the years, but still have some sleep issues. Yes.
Well, let's talk about key insights from David Creswell's article. How about that?
Okay.
This is so cool that that he and his colleagues really focused on how are we going to look at the interplay between sleep and learning, and to see and to really zero in on this idea that you get right down to this difference between 6 and 6.5 hours and 7 hours are meaningfully different measures. That 30 minutes, those 30-minute increments are important.
Yeah. And not just that. I love that this study looked at long-term performance in a real world situation, grade point averages, right?
Yeah,
this is not a lab study where they then do how your cognitive pieces after waking up and different things. This is sleeping in a natural setting. It's wearing a Fitbit, so they're tracking that. Mm-hmm. And it is showing the impact that sleep at the beginning of the quarter has on their long term, which is really fascinating when you think about it. Because you go, all right, I get this idea that sleep can have an immediate impact on that day or different pieces, but to kind of have that cascade down river, so to say, into your grade point average that is longer term, that's really, really kind of important.
Yeah, let me I just want to take exactly what you said and just think about it this way, that a bad night's sleep doesn't just impact the next day. It impacts maybe your whole life, or at least for weeks,
wow.
weeks and months to come.
Are you talking chaos theory here? One bad night, I then missed the sliding glass doors, and all of a sudden my life is totally changed.
It could be a sliding doors thing. It could be, yeah, absolutely.
So I think this is really interesting, and we talked a lot about the actual study in the interview, but. And I know we shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. But what I find really fascinating about this is this idea that while they studied freshmen in college and that impact on grade point average, the implications for this, I think, can be generalized. And I know we're not supposed to generalize these kind of studies out there, but I think that this is one that is probably okay to at least think about it in that perspective, to say, hey, sleep not only matters for freshmen in grade point averages, but probably for new hires in their job, in their first few months of the job, for middle managers who are trying to lead, organizations, for parents who have kids and are trying to, make sure that they do everything positive. I think it could be maybe expanded to a larger group.
How about if you're a CEO making decisions about the strategic direction of the company?
Maybe
there could be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people impacted by how well you're sleeping and how fresh and sharp your brain is when it comes to processing these things.
And again, it is the little bits that kind of add up, right? It is that difference between 6.5 and 7. It is the ability for our brains to learn, right? That sleep replay, that hippocampus coming in, that active period of learning. It is the other components of taking the toxins out of our brain at night. It is all of those facets that play into the long-term productivity and output that we are able to produce. And so, yes, I think CEOs in particular, and there's a couple that are prominent that I know don't get a lot of sleep just from what they say on their platforms and other things. And you kind of go, maybe you ought to begin some more sleep, dude.
We talked to Ruchir Sarah, who was the developer. He's my recollection is that he is a psychologist and entrepreneur, and he created the Resonia app. For to help people. That was back in episode 26.
Man, we were just pups. We were young. I had hair, all that kind of stuff.
It was even before you had kids. I mean, it was like, no,
it wasn't.
Okay. But clearly this, and I want to come back to something that you said, that sleep is an active period of learning is something that keeps coming up. It just makes me want to find a guest who we could talk to about maybe the neuroscience of sleep.
Oh, I think that would be awesome. We need to get that. If anybody knows of them, let us know. Send us an email or tweet us or do whatever it is that you need to do.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Houlihan, let's give our listeners, let's give those groovers out there some tips. Now, most of our groovers are smart. They probably have heard all of these sleep tips already because a lot of them are there. But let's give them, because sometimes, even though we know, right?
It's good
to
be
reminded.
reminded.
Necessarily do them. All
Agreed.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And by the way, we sourced this from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a reputable organization that has done good stuff. And newsflash, the idea of turning off your electronic devices 30 minutes before bedtime is not a newsflash. But it's good to be reminded. Okay, where would you want to start in this, Kurt?
So one thing that I've started to do as much as I can, and I'm not really good at this, but it has helped, is keeping a consistent sleep schedule. So this idea of trying to get to sleep within a certain time frame, for me, it's a little bit after 11, and then getting up every day at about the same time. For me, it's about 6:30, 6:45. So that is an idea that, hey, it helps set your body's circadian rhythm. And by doing that, your body is expecting to go to sleep and is prepared to go to sleep at that time. Right. And it is getting up at that same time. So it's a piece, and I think that it's really important. And again, there's lots of research on larks versus owls and various different things. So, set that sleep pattern that's good for you.
Can you explain larks versus owls? Not all of our listeners might know the difference.
Thank you. So we all have a circadian rhythm. This idea that out of 24 hours, there's certain periods where our body is more active and engaged, and other periods where our body is more relaxed and tired. And we tend to have sleep patterns, and some are early risers. Those are the larks. Those are the people who get up early and feel like refreshed in the morning and can just go at it. And then there are the owls, and the owls are, as you can kind of guess from the reference, they're nighttime. They stay up late and they don't operate as well in the morning. And most of us fit somewhere in between, right? And so, but we all have our own kind of optimal circadian rhythm. Now, you can change that, from my understanding. And I know I was working with a sleep doctor for a while, and they said I was a owl, and I'm going, but I can't be, because I can't sleep in the morning because I have client meetings and other things. So, yeah. And they talked about, well, then you have to wean yourself off of that. So.
One other thing to add to that is that a circadian rhythm has to do with how we perform over our 24-hour period. That is our start to stop day, basically, including sleep and daytime activities. Yeah. So just for those folks who are not familiar with that term. I like to have a relaxing bedtime routine as well. Mm-hmm. And so as you mentioned, I do kind of sleep like a baby. I sleep really well. I'm really grateful for that.
So what's your routine?
Well, my routine is the get ready for bed routine it's kind of the same stuff. It's the, floss and brush and that kind of stuff. And my preference is to read something kind of calming and quieting. For just a few minutes, even 4 or 5 minutes, just to take my mind off of whatever was going. And I rely on a great gift that I got from you, Kurt, and that is the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. I do,
because it's so boring. There you go.
No, it's just really peaceful. It's just and it's oriented in such a way that you can read 3 or 4 meditations.
That's true.
In just a couple of minutes. And it's just, it's a nice way for me to get into sleep. And sometimes Katie and I will have sort of a end of the day chat at that time as well. But it's calm and revisiting, and we're not trying to solve world problems at that time.
Well, I do similar, brush and floss and take my medication and do all of that. And I mark that off on my calendar. Right. I check it off. And so I have not missed brushing and flossing in like 3 years, not even a day. So it's been pretty consistent on that. And then I typically go and I do some journaling. And so I sit in a chair that's a comfortable chair, in another room that's kind of adjacent to our bedroom. And I write down some thoughts. Sometimes it's as simple as, it was a good day or it was a hectic day and that's it. And other times it's a couple paragraphs talking, kind of letting those things in my brain kind of get out onto that paper, and that helps. So that's what I do. And then I head off to bed. And yeah.
That seems pretty reasonable. I go back to a comment that a physician made to me many years ago that said, he said, a good night's sleep happens after you've had a good day.
Yeah.
And so that supports the recommendation here from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine that regular exercise and a healthy diet really contribute to a good day.
Yeah.
They contribute to sort of getting you actually in the position of having a good night's sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting because my sleep problems have never usually been about falling asleep initially. Mm-hmm. They've usually been waking up. And so it's the waking up and then not falling back asleep. And for me, mostly it's stress related. It is ruminating over what's going on. I got all these things to do, all these various different aspects. And so I have found the Academy of Sleep Medicine, American Academy of Sleep Medicine, recommends that you get out of bed and you go quietly do an activity without lots of light exposure for 20 minutes or so and then get back into bed. I don't. What I end up doing and what's worked for me is I have sleep phones, which you've seen, which is basically a headband that has speakers in them so I can lay on my side of my head and they're not like eating into my skull. And I have a sleep playlist where all the songs are ones that I know. It's I know the order that they're coming in. And what that does, and it's interesting because my daughter goes, "This is your sleep music?" And because it's kind of, some of the music's not like all relaxing and calm. Right. It's actually some, thumping music and different things. But for me, what it does is it allows me to, my brain starts going to the lyrics, and it starts, instead of ruminating over all of the work I have to do or the things that I haven't done and all of that, my brain starts thinking, oh, what are these lyrics? And then that slowly gets me back into sleep, and it works really well for me for the most part.
There's a lot of environmental stuff in this. And we know that behavioral science, if nothing, reminds us that context matters.
Yeah.
Right? That environment and the situation in which things happen is huge impact, right?
I found even just putting the headband on and having that headband pressure, even if I don't have the music on with it, helps. It just kind of, it's like I've been reinforced into this idea, oh, headbands on, must be sleeping,
That's good. I'm glad you're not thinking, now I look like Richard Simmons, because that's
everybody up and jazzercise. And so, and again, there's all of the different pieces. Andrew Huberman talks a lot. The Academy talks about limiting exposure to bright light in the evenings. Mm-hmm. Andrew Huberman also talks about getting bright light in the morning early. Again, that helps reset your circadian rhythm. Obviously, avoid caffeine, drinking alcohol before bedtime. Reduce fluid intake if you're like me and get up in the middle of the night because you have to go pee, and then you're up. Then you start brain operating. So limit all that. So
my brain never operates. So, getting up in the middle of the night to pee, it isn't shaking anything up because it's like zzz, radio silence there anyway. So
well, I think that's probably enough to wrap up this episode of Behavioral Grooves. If we go on longer, I'm pretty sure listeners will start nodding off.
Well, maybe that's a good thing.
Well, hopefully our listeners haven't fallen asleep from being too bored during this episode.
Well, what if it wasn't being bored? What if they fell asleep because of the somnolescence of our voices? How about that?
Now, there's a word I haven't ever used. Somnolescence. There you go.
All right. Well, for me, this is exciting and informative, and for, Kurt and I really love to talk about this content because it's meaningful to lots of people. And by the way, if you groovers, if you think that, we would love for you to follow us or subscribe to the podcast or maybe even just your favorite pod episode, any behavioral groove stuff that you like, love it, favorite it, support it, all those kinds of things. Apple, Spotify, whatever pod service that you choose to listen to, just give us a follow or a subscribe, click, and we would just really appreciate it.
And please forward the episode on to a friend or colleague, or post about it in social media. All those things are greatly, greatly appreciated.
And with that, we hope you've learned something from this episode too, and that this week you get some good sleep that helps you go out and find your groove.